Recording in progress.
Hi everyone, welcome as you're joining. We're just going to be waiting a few minutes here. I'll just let everyone get in. All right, I don't see any more people joining. Jenny, is that everyone out of the waiting room?
That looks like it, yep.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to get started then. Thank you everyone so much for joining, both beginners and guides alike. Selena says echo, by the way. Is that on my screen? Are you guys hearing me twice?
I'm not hearing anything.
Okay. Okay. All right, I think we're okay then. Okay, so we will kick it off then. Welcome to the beginner series. Today we're talking about when to model versus when to wait. So this is our second beginner series. This is still a bit of a sort of trial run. So if you have feedback today, we welcome it. Slide. All right. So most of you, I'm assuming, either came from the forum or are already involved in this. But just kind of as a quick overview, the beginner series, the idea is that it's essentially a sort of office hours to the lecture that is, I don't know, real life. We have some panelists that can kind of act as TAs and help you out and just answer your questions in like an actual specific scenario. Here's what's going on. The idea is that it's just a casual forum, the same as like the How.TheyCanTalk forum or the Facebook groups or the Discord channels. Or the subreddits, as Heather says. Welcome from Reddit. It's just a live version of that. So we can just help out people that are here and talk about actual, themes every week. So as far as hosts, I'm Ginny. My learner is Aid. I don't see him around right now, but he's a 7-year-old border collie, very hyperactive. And I am a fluent pet guide, which means that I post on social media, giving, helping out learners and giving information. And then our other host who's managing the Twitch channel today is Jenny. Jenny, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Jenny. I'm a fluent pet research administrator as well as the How.TheyCanTalk community manager. I have 3 learners, Hero, Percy, and Orion. And I'm here to help with fluent pet questions as well as the Twitch and figuring out the tech side.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so that covered. Let's move on. Okay, so this week, like I said, we figured we wanted to discuss the when to model versus when to wait category, because that's something I don't hear a lot of information out there on, but it really is super relevant, and it's something that comes up in more conversations between the guides and more experienced people a lot. It's really something that's not even, there's no right answers. Every learner's different, and even when you've been doing it a while, it can be hard, but it really is something that's worth discussing. So I'll let our panelists take us off with the bulk of the information, but just some things to consider when we're talking about it, when we're thinking about it, is things like processing times. Obviously, dogs, cats, cows, peahens have longer processing times than humans do. It takes them some time to realize what you're saying. Age and threshold is a big one as well. So yeah, it may take your puppy, 30 seconds to figure it out, but they may only have a 10-second attention span. So that can be something to consider. And then also being able to work on reading their body language to tell when they're frustrated versus when they're just thinking, and when you want to prompt that and when you don't. So I will take it away then with our panelists here. So the question I want to ask them today is, how do you decide when you want to repeat something, when you want to model something new, or when you want to elaborate on something, versus when you just wait for your learner to answer. So first up, we have Sasha and her learner, Parker. So take it away.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Sasha. My learner is Parker. She's a 1-year-old beagle mix. She's having a snooze on the couch right now. And I think like one of the things for me has really been acknowledging that while she is learning, so am I. I'm learning her as a learner. And so that, took time. But for me, it's a lot about with her body language. So she'll frequently, if she says something, make some pretty intense eye contact while I either, respond, or if I ask her a question. And I try and wait until she breaks that eye contact. And then how I make the decision, to whether it's time to model is if she kind of seems to disengage, then I'll try and kind of bring her back to the conversation through modeling. Or if, she changes the subject, maybe I'll try and bring her back that way and kind of model what we're trying to talk about and things like that. But I have waited anywhere from, a few seconds to, I don't know, like a good 30, 45 seconds. I mean, sometimes it's really about just sitting there. Sometimes she'll do what I've started calling a thinking circle. She'll walk away from the board and she'll kind of turn around and come back. She's clearly processing it. And I found that if I give her time, she's more likely to use the buttons as a tool as opposed to kind of getting frustrated with the process. So those are just kind of some, I guess, initial thoughts that I have about when I choose which to do.
Nice, awesome. Thank you, Sasha. That's definitely agree with what you said there. And sorry, I just realized that I didn't, because I don't have it on here, didn't mention our disclaimer. Sorry, Jenny, but just wanted to say that what we're doing here, we're from the They Can Talk forum, but what we are, like the opinions we're sharing here, they are not the official stance of FluentPet or of the research team or anything like that. It's nothing is absolute. It's really just our own opinions that we've gotten from common experience and a long time of doing this. Also, just to mention, if there are any other kind of guides or test pilots in the audience, anyone who's non-panelist, if you can raise your hand if you want to share, something verbally. This is good. Okay, sorry about that, Anna. Go ahead, over to you.
No worries. So my name is Anna. My primary learner is Birdie, who I don't know if you can see him on camera. He doesn't show up on camera very well. He is a 10-year-old toy poodle, and we've been learning the buttons since August of 2020. I don't, he is a black hole, yeah. I don't tend to do a lot of elaboration if I'm the one who asked a question. If I ask a question and Birdie doesn't really respond, it's usually because he doesn't care. So if I ask him like if he's hungry and he just wanders away from the board, then the answer is no. When I tend to repeat or try to get him to elaborate is if he has said something that I don't understand. Like lately, just this morning, he's been pressing dog, which we mostly use as a word to distinguish between strangers who are humans and strangers who are dogs. And he's not crazy about either of those groups, but his reactions to them are different. So it was useful to us to have like dog on the board. We don't use dog a ton to talk about Birdie or our other learner, Rosie, who's much less advanced. But when he does stuff like that, then I'll say, dog, what? Or what do you want? Like that's when I'll prod for a little bit more exposition on his part. Like sometimes he likes to just press more. I'm like, more what? I need need to know what you want. But generally with him, he's pretty stubborn, and he's not he will not be forced to use the buttons. He super dislikes being pressured to do any pressing that he's not interested in. So mostly I let him lead, I would say. Because whenever I've tried to sort of put more emphasis on getting him to push buttons when he doesn't feel like it, that's when we have setbacks. That's when he shuts down and decides he's not interested in the whole thing.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you, Anna. No, that's cool. I love it, and I love the variety of experiences. This is what we hope for. All right. So last up, we have Janet with her 1,000,002 learners.
Yeah, I really do. So I have 3 learners. They are all at different stages. Nala is what I like to call my power learner. She is my dog that I kind of started with. And she's the one that just easy breezy, just no problem with her whatsoever. I also have my cat Grover, who just started kind of all on his own. And then my dog Bear, who needs a lot of help. Bless his heart. So I'll try and cover each of them because they're all different as far as how I handle modeling and what I do. For Nala, because she is my strongest learner, it's maybe a little bit easier, maybe. She tends to press the buttons when I'm not in the room. So she is trying to get my attention and she wants me to do what she says with the buttons. So with her, I tend to repeat her presses a lot to acknowledge that I heard what she said, even though I was in a different room. So like, I'll come down the hall and go to the board and repeat what she pressed to acknowledge that, yep, I heard you. And then I will answer her with, whether we're going to do that thing. And, it's usually playing tug. So whether we're going to play tug or not, or whatever. So for her, I tend to repeat a lot just because she's kind of calling me from a different room. For my cat Grover, he needs some thinking time. So he'll go to the board and then he'll sit there. And I even have pictures of him just like sitting at the board, all pretty, just, perfectly, very photogenic. And I have to give him some extra processing time because I'll see him kind of lift his paw up like he's thinking that, he's going to press a button. And so I have to be very quiet and slow with him and give him plenty of time to think. He doesn't look at the buttons, so he just, I don't know, shoots his paw out. I don't know how he figures out where to put his paw, but I give him a lot of extra time and space. So I'm not even verbally saying anything to him. I'm just standing there watching, waiting for him to kind of think. And then for my, I hate to say it, but my weakest learner, Bear, my other dog, for him, he gets frustrated very easily. So it's all about low pressure with Bear. So for Bear, I do a lot of modeling of, just 1 or 2 button presses, and that's it for him. And I don't ask for him to really press the buttons too much. So I do a heavy amount of modeling for him to kind of show him, I press this button and then this thing happens, because he's not at the stage where he's really pressing buttons by himself. And my other 2 learners are. So, and he, like I said, he gets stressed out. So I see signs of stress where, he kind of starts panting heavy, and I'm really careful with his body language. So it definitely depends on your learner. It varies for all of my different pets. And I think the key thing is really paying attention to their body language, because they're all presenting me with different body language signs. So Nala, when she presses from a different room, she will come and she will stare at me. So she will find me where I am and she will look at me hard and she will be like, let's do the thing now. Like, she gives me looks. So it's very clear that she is expecting a response. Grover, like I said, he'll lift his paw up and you can tell that he's kind of thinking like, okay, I'm going to press this button, but where's, and what am I doing? And Bear just kind of gets anxious and he moves around and he might lie down. So, you know, if he starts to disengage and go to his bed, then I know that I've pushed him a little bit too hard, and I try and just go easier on him. So body language is a huge part of that. Making sure they're having fun, definitely.
I love that. Making sure they're having fun. That's a good metric to go by. Okay, so that was really awesome. Those were 3 really good, useful variety of answers there. So essentially, now that we have done an introduction, I want to open it up to if there are people in the audience essentially that have comments or questions or whatever it may be on the theme this week. If they don't, then I have plenty of my questions of my own to ask some of the panelists on the theme. And I think we're going to do that for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to just general questions if there's people that just want some advice on basically anything. Okay.
And if you want to ask questions, you can raise your hand in the Zoom. You can type in the chat in Zoom, or you can type in the chat in Twitch. We will see your question in all of those places.
Yes. Okay. And I'm just going to rearrange everything here. Okay. Okay, so let's see. So Kathy says, if your learner is a total beginner, how do you decide when to model?
I know. I've got an answer for this one. All the time. You always model. I realized after I gave my introduction that I didn't mention, but hey, can you chill a little bit? I almost never speak only verbally to Birdie when we're using specifically words about the buttons. Like, obviously I talk to him all the time. But if it's a button word, those have a lot more power to him than just the other stuff that I say all the time. And I always model. Like, we are going on 2 years into this, and you never stop modeling. I know that there are some people whose learners are fine with them just verbally addressing them and answering via the buttons, but that absolutely would not work with Birdie. And yeah, especially if you're a beginner, you model all the time, whether your learner is paying attention to you or not. Like, just always.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. You know, I mentioned that I have 3 learners. I started with 1. I started with Nala, and about 9 or 10 months in, my cat Grover, who I had done absolutely nothing with, started pressing buttons. And then shortly thereafter, my dog Bear, who I'd done very little with, started pressing a button here and there. So they definitely are listening no matter what. And yeah, I definitely agree, Anna. Modeling all the time, no matter what, for everything. And you never know who is listening, because honestly, they probably all are. If you have multiple pets, they're all listening and they're all learning, even though they're not even looking at you. Like, Grover never looks at me. He just learned. I don't know how. So yeah, great point. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say as someone who has a learner who will respond with the buttons, not only to me if I just verbally speak, but has responded to the television, has responded to a song playing, has responded to me rhetorically asking a question, kind of to myself. I have noticed that because of that, I will slack sometimes now that she's much more proficient at modeling. And when I do that, it impacts her. She is a stronger user of her buttons and will kind of fade off of it. Not completely, but just she'll kind of get more limited and less kind of specific with her requests or her comments if I'm not modeling it as much. And so I find that when I notice that if I go back to modeling, that kind of brings her back to being like, oh, right, I can use all of these things. And sure, you want me to be more specific and things like that. So I agree. It's just kind of always useful to continue to remind yourself to model, even though you have to kind of do it less and you're not the only one pressing the buttons as you are at the very, very beginning.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to throw in there. We had a weird experience a little bit ago where we were comparing kind of how much we modeled every day with different guides. And even like I and some of the other guides were surprised by like there were people that were modeling up to like 50 times a day. And I'm like, I didn't realize that for a long time, that you could have to model that much. People do it 1 or 2 times a day and be like, why is it not working? But yeah. Okay, anyways, I think, Heather, you had your hand up. I don't see it up anymore. Did you still have a question? I'm gonna take that as a no. We'll come back if that comes up again. Okay. So next one we had in chat was, what is the best way to handle button presses for requests when you're not able to give them that thing at the time? For example, when working at home, I can't stop every 5 minutes to play or answer requests.
I mean, I think at the very beginning, I tried to do it as much as possible, even when I didn't want to, just to really build the associations. But in one of the early buttons that I introduced, actually one of the first buttons that I introduced was also all done. And so having that as a counter to a lot of these things, and then eventually introducing things like soon or later has been helpful. So, you know, I think having all done as one of the really early buttons was helpful to just be like, this is, you know, because then I'm still modeling, right? Even when I can't do it, I'm still using the buttons and giving an example of, you know, this is all done. And then I can start verbally modeling some words that will be introduced down the road. And so it still is an opportunity to model, just maybe a different word than the one that they're using or asking for in that moment.
I totally agree. I also think that it is useful, especially early on, as much as you can respond via the buttons, do it, but obviously it's not feasible if you're in a work meeting or whatever. But in addition to, like, I love all done. All done is a great button. I think it was our 4th or 5th button, and I recommend it to everyone as one of their sort of starter buttons, because it's very important. And you want to establish boundaries, and like, it's important to remember that it is much harder to say no to a talking dog, but you can still say no, right? Just because you have a learner that is asking you questions in a different way doesn't mean telling them they can't have a thing is not the same as not rewarding them for the buttons, right? That interaction is still a reward. But also, I do think in the early days, as much as you can indulge your learner with stuff that is annoying to you, absolutely do it, right? As much as you can make the buttons a positive experience and teach them that the buttons are, I mean, because part of the arrangement we have here is that the buttons are giving your learner power that they didn't have before. And so some of that is like agreeing to like, yeah, okay, maybe we will have a discussion. Like maybe I will think a little bit more critically about the rules I've set for my dog and whether or not this is really a feasible thing to say yes or no to, and like, why am I saying why is my reflex to say no, right? But especially with like again, work meeting type questions, I think you should think a lot about alternatives. So like, we can't play right now, but what can we do instead? Do you have a puzzle? Do you have a chew? Do you have something else you can give your learner that's going to be entertaining for them and take up some time? And then you can say, okay, chew now, play later. So it's not always just, I'm busy, no, all the time. Think of something else you can say yes to. That's all.
Sorry, I got lost in my sea of tabs. Okay, we're back. Okay, the next question we had was, do you have advice for when learners are in that stage where they understand buttons but aren't pressing them on their own without prompting? Other than model, what else can we do to help our learner get to the next stage?
Okay, I have thoughts. I always have thoughts, but I'll give everybody else a chance to jump in if they want to. I don't think there is a point in either really prompting or waiting until you get to that point that your learner understands that stuff happens when the buttons get pressed. Because otherwise you're just wasting everyone's time. But once you get to that point, then I do think that's when you can start waiting. You can start doing a little encouragement to press the buttons. If you've got a learner who maybe is pawing at the buttons but hasn't depressed it all the way yet, you can encourage more of that behavior. And yeah, that's when we talk about on the forums about, counting to 15, counting to 30 in your head, just to give them time, because it does, once they start kind of processing, it takes them longer than it would with a conversation with a person. Or think of them as like someone for whom English or whatever language you're learning is not their first language, right? There's just extra processing time that they need. And that's when you can do things like, for instance, Birdie's very first independent button press was, we had hungry was our food word at the time. It still is, but now we also have food, which I recommend as a starter over hungry. But I would go out every morning, press hungry, and feed him. And he was in kind of a not interested in the buttons enormously phase at that point, or certainly not in that button. But there was one morning when he kind of rushed ahead of me towards the button. And I would normally just go and push it, and he just was interested in it. And I just thought, I'm just going to give him a second. I'm just going to give him a beat. And he looked at me and he looked at the button, like, why aren't you pushing the button? And then he looked at me and he looked at the button, and I just like stood, and then he pressed it. And I don't know. I feel like that's a fairly, when people talk about first button presses, I feel like it's kind of that a lot. Like they just like, I just gave a moment, right? And so once you've got the understanding that something happens when the buttons are pressed, and if they understand, at that point you can start encouraging them to also maybe push the buttons if they haven't done any accidental presses. Like, for instance, excuse me, there are people whose like dogs will just like, puppy, can you not? People whose learners are just like plow across the board and roll over on the buttons or whatever. And obviously every time that happens, that's an instance for you to enforce that and be like, yeah, you press the button. We're going to go outside. We're going to do whatever you just accidentally stumbled over, right? But we didn't have a ton of those with Birdie. So, and some learners don't do that. Some learners are just not interested in the buttons. And then you do need to do a little bit of prompting maybe, or like some target training. That I don't know if we want to get into target training in this conversation, but just to teach them that they can also interact with the button, particularly I think with older dogs. I don't know if it's a cat thing as often as it is with dogs. And I don't think it happens as much with puppies, because with a puppy, you're sort of learning to interact. But like with Birdie, we started when he was 9. And so we already had stuff set up, and he's he's not super well trained, but like he's fairly well trained. And I've seen a lot of people on the forums with much better trained dogs, right? Dogs who've been doing agility and obedience and stuff like that. And older dogs are typically trained to wait for a command to interact with an object to get a reward. So if you have a dog that is really well trained and is taught to wait for you, you're going to have to do a lot more work to get them to figure out that they don't need to wait for a cue to press the button. So like it's very learner dependent, and there's a lot of kind of, you have to be able to kind of read what's going on with your learner. I don't know, I feel like I'm starting to ramble now. Somebody else has to add.
Yeah, I definitely agree. My dog Bear he's an older dog. He's he's adopted, so I don't know exactly how old, but somewhere between 12 and 14. And he's definitely struggled with not having to wait for me to tell him that it's okay. So that's certainly been an issue for him. And that's why he's my weakest learner, because my cat doesn't care. He'll ask for things no matter what. And my other dog, Nala, she started with the buttons when she was about 1.5 years. So she was, a teenager. So she had a lot of thoughts. And yeah, I think the one thing that I will say is, definitely that processing time is really important. I always think of it as, imagine you're learning a new language yourself and how long it takes you. If somebody came up to you was speaking that different language and expected you to answer them, how long would it take you to really process what they're saying? Because I think we talk a lot about dogs process things slower, or cats process things slower. Humans are pretty slow too when we're learning a new language, and that's what this is. This is a new language, and at the same time, I'll say be forgiving of yourself too, because it's a new language for yourself too. So for me, one of the things that I really struggled with in the beginning was actually grammar and what order to put words in. And eventually I realized that it doesn't matter as long as my learner understands me and I understand my learner. It's not about what Anna and her learners understand. It's about what me and my learners understand. So try not to get hung up too much in the details like that. And I think it's helped me a lot, because I'm currently trying to learn Greek, which is a whole different alphabet, and it's not easy. So, if somebody came up to me and started talking in Greek, I would have a long processing time too. So I try and think about that and make sure that I'm giving my learners equal processing time. And then also, it's okay for me to take a beat and think about what, Nala has said to me with the buttons. So it's okay for you to have to sit back and be like, wait, what does that mean now? So it's new for both of you, and that's okay. And the key is to just kind of build it together. And if it's not fun, then I would say, take a step back and, make sure that it's fun for both of you, because it really shouldn't be a hassle. But boundaries are definitely important. I'll kind of echo what Anna said at the very beginning. Definitely use those boundary words of all done. That was our second button. So those are really important buttons to add pretty early on, because just like with kids, the pets really appreciate boundaries, and it's not a bad thing.
Okay, awesome. Oh my goodness. That was so much good advice from you two all packed into one thing. Okay, so going back to something a little more menial, I guess. We had a question about hardware. So this person says they only bought 4 buttons from the learning resources ones. Now wondering if they should invest in a set with hex tiles, and if so, soft or hard hex tiles. I can speak to that if no one has experience, because I started basically exactly the same way. We got our set of, I think it was like 4 or 6 of the learning buttons. And I actually, like, I know for cats it's not great, but for us it was a decent way to start. I have nothing against that, but there were just some major issues with it for us. We still use a few of them, honestly. But like the fact that he would, if you hold them, they reset. My dog literally reset them like 20 times a day, because he would be trying to hold them. The buttons don't do that, and he will stand on them. So that was a big thing for me. And also space was just a really big deal, because they're like twice the size. Yeah, obviously the Fluent Pet ones, like, you kind of want to start going towards that at some point. I didn't get hex tails until like quite recently, and I wish I'd gotten them sooner, because I don't know, they're so much easier to like categorize stuff and to actually like make the space. I have mine like taped down to like a board and stuff, and it's never been quite as good. It's a good way to start, but I'd say like after like 6 months or so, it's definitely good to start moving up. I don't have an opinion on soft or hard hex tiles, because I haven't had both. I don't know if anyone has had both and can speak to that.
I do. I want to echo a little bit about, I try to be pretty button agnostic. Like, I know there are some people who want to do this who, for whatever reason, live in parts of the world where they can't get learning resource or Fluent Pet buttons, right?
I didn't want him to get too upset. I tried to.
I think the Fluent Pet buttons are really good. They're built for this in a way that, until very recently, there's starting to be some other buttons popping up on Amazon and places that also claim that they are made specifically for this kind of animal use, right? And I don't have any experience with any of those, but I think you got to use what you can use. And like, people have done this with flashcards, and that is much less convenient, but it's also way cheaper and more accessible. So I don't want anybody to come away thinking I need to spend a whole bunch of money to be able to do this, because you don't. We started out with not learning resource buttons. We started off with some like learning resource knockoff buttons, and they were terrible. And I don't recommend that if you decide to do buttons, that you go with like the cheapest ones you can find, because you will regret it. And then you'll have a bunch of extra buttons that you know, I don't know what I'm going to do with these. Birdie weighs 7 pounds now, because he has gained a pound since we started doing button learning. And the big buttons were too hard for him to press. Fluent Pet buttons are way easier to press. So if you have a small learner, like I definitely tell people to go for Fluent Pet over learning resource. With the hex tiles are just a really useful way to organize your buttons that you don't have to kind of jerry rig. Like there are people who have built dog computers from scratch, and like, if you want to do that, go for it, absolutely. But I think hex tiles are like the easiest solution. The hard top tiles, I think, are good if you have kind of a rough learner who's gonna maybe somebody who like a Bastion, right? Who like paws a lot and maybe is gonna tear up the softer tiles. I would not get hard top tiles for any learner that you think is gonna like chew on the edges, because they're covered with a piece of hard plastic. They're the same soft foam underneath, but this hard plastic, at least the ones that I have, kind of shatter if you put like the wrong kind of torque on them. Like, they're very durable, and we haven't had any problems with Birdie, but one time I was trying to like jam a button in there and it just like split, And this plastic, I think, will splinter, the hardtop plastic, if you have like a puppy or someone who's going to chew on these. Somebody else, I remember on the forums, was talking about a cat that was going to chew, and I was like, don't get the hardtop. Also, I will say, the hardtop ones, no offense to the team at Fluent Pet, they're doing their best, but the hardtop ones are really ugly. So these are objects that you have in your house. And like, I don't, like, our soundboard is not a beautiful object. It's not horrible to look at. Like, it's fine. We've made our peace with it. There's also dog toys littered around our living room, so it's fine. But like, if you are a person who cares a lot about sort of, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to care about, that like the buttons look semi-attractive in the space where you spend all your time. So like, that's why I'm so excited about these solid colored tiles that come out. When the solid colored tiles come out, I am going to replace probably all my hardtop tiles, because they're all just sort of army green and kind of swampy blue. So like, if that's a thing, I think they could be really useful if you have a big learner, if you have somebody who is an active presser but isn't going to chew, like somebody who's just like rough and excited about the buttons, then I think the hardtop tiles are great. They're easier to hose down. But otherwise, I think the soft top, for most learners, I think the soft top tiles are the way to go. Those are my thoughts. And absolutely don't be afraid to DIY stuff. Like, if you look on the forums at Celiana's board, like, she made her soundboard from scratch out of like stuff she got at the craft store. And there are tons of people who have done, there was somebody else who's has access to a CNC machine who just machined her own entire soundboard. So like, if that's stuff you have access to, that's great. But also, like, don't be afraid to just go to Michael's and kind of see what else is there. If for some reason you think the foam tiles won't work for you, but they probably will. They're the easiest. They have ones that fit the big buttons and the small buttons. Like, it's the simplest way to go. And the tiles by themselves are not very expensive. So.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so moving back to Learning Talk. And just so you're aware, I do have everyone's questions from the chat. Jenny's been very good at collecting them all. We will get to all of them. So don't worry if we haven't gotten to yours yet. My learner only uses one button for what she wants. How do I get her to expand into using more buttons to explain? I feel like this is a very common issue.
I can talk about this a little bit, because this is the stage that I'm at with my cat Grover. He thinks that every single button means food, which is my fault, because that's how I trained him. I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway. I don't recommend doing that. But what I'm doing now is just slowly and surely, if he presses a button that does not mean food, then he doesn't get food. He gets whatever the button is he pressed. So my soundboard was designed, and the buttons I picked out were for my dog. So a common one that I have is my cat Grover will press bone. It is right next to the food button. So he'll press bone, and thanks to some very good advice, I decided to start getting the dog bone out for him, and I give the cat the dog bone. He sniffs it, and as you might imagine, he does not care about that. So then I put it away when he's done sniffing it. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually model food. So I'll press the food button myself for him and, remind him where it's at. And then I'll give him food. But I do make sure that I'm giving him what he's pressing. And I'll be honest, it's a rough transition to get them away from, one button, like every button means the same thing, to every button means something different. But that's how I've been going about doing it. And he is starting to show some progress in that area. So we're having some good success so far.
Yeah, I mean, just a variation on that. I have a couple of buttons that, started more general, and then, as time went on, got more specific. So, we started with an outside button, and now we have, walk, we have these soccer fields that we go to, we have the backyard, we have these variations. And it can take some time to figure out, well, why I just want this, like, I don't want to be more specific, or something like that. And with that, kind of, to bring us to modeling again for a second, just took a lot of modeling and patience. And I mean, I just would keep modeling how I would talk about, something more specific. So she might say, outside, and I might say, okay, outside backyard. And then, take her, to the backyard, and then kind of, also I'll keep modeling the specificity. And ultimately, that would be something that she picked up. But I mean, that could take weeks, it could take months. And so patience, and kind of persistence, and yeah, kind of, if they're pressing, a button when they really want something else, doing the thing that they're pressing. But if they're pressing something more general, and you sort of know what they want, you're trying to get them to be more specific, to still kind of attend to that while kind of modeling the specificity, so that they understand that they can use, I mean, that also models kind of 2 button phrases for specificity. So you're kind of getting 2 sorts of modeling examples in at the same time.
Nice. Okay, next question we had was, how do you feel about buttons being a phrase versus just a word?
I have feelings about this. I think it super depends on the phrase. If your phrase is like, let's go for a walk in the park, there are a lot of like intermediate spots that you could break down that you are giving up to have that phrase. We have a couple phrases on the board, like love you, get ready is one that I added recently, that just means like, I'm getting your food ready. So we're all actively in the process of doing this thing, but it's still going to take a couple minutes while I do it. So I think phrases, like there are some phrases where people are like, that are unrepeatable, actually, now that I think about it, that are maybe replacements for mad or whatever. And those I think are fine if that's not a phrase that you are gonna get very tired of your learner pressing over and over for like whatever reason, like if that happens. I think they can be fine, but I don't think you want to make them so specific that you're giving up other opportunities, that you're making your future grammar more complicated, right? You always want to be, I think a lot of people start thinking about like, okay, I want to teach my learner, these 5 words are the words we're going to start with. And I see more people now like planning out their board, I'm planning out my next 50 buttons. And that's fine too. But like, I think, it's important to kind of build in flexibility, because you don't always know what's going to be important to your learner. Like you might have some ideas like, okay, my cat's super into this toy, so they're going to want to talk about this a lot, but stuff will surprise you, right? There are learners who love to discuss the weather, which I don't think any of us expected when we started this. And so you just want to make sure when you put in phrases instead of individual words, you're just kind of, you might be blocking yourself into a corner, in a way that later on you'll regret. And it's not the end of the world if that happens, because you can always add more buttons. But yeah, just sort of think about sort of future use and alternate uses for different words, when you're making that decision.
Yeah, I'll echo that last piece in particular. For example, we have a go button, and I had originally been modeling go to be like, oh, we're going to like do something right now, right? So like we'll go car, and then we'll go daycare, right? For example. But Parker also hears me say let's go when we're on walks a lot. And so she uses go as let's go as well. So there are ways that I hadn't anticipated her using the buttons that expand her vocabulary just in one button, because I understand there are multiple uses for it, that I'm not thinking about. That if I had given her, say, like a "we're going" or a "let's go" button, it wouldn't kind of be as clear how she was using it. So I think, just to echo Anna's point, that you have more flexibility in terms of meaning. I mean, even dogs who have, or learners who have 100 buttons, that's still only 100 words they have, to work with. And so the more flexibility for multiple meanings that you can give them, I think, is really opening up the potential for the communication more.
Nice. And yeah, I remember a point someone brought up last time this was discussed, is that basically anything on the board becomes like one word. So like, be ready. If you're going to put a good test is if you're going to put a phrase on the board, like think about it like if they used that in a entire sentence. Like, it's one thing to have like "all done" on the board. It's like you can say like "all done ball now," and "all done" is one word and that works, but "let's go to the park" or whatever, if they start trying to use that in phrases, it starts to get a little weird.
Let's go ball.
Let's go to the park. Let's go to the park ball. Let's go to the park big. Yeah, it starts to get a bit messy. Anyways, next question. Sorry, just catching up. Okay, we have 5 dogs, but Harper is the only official learner. I know there was more to this. Essentially, they said, "I'd like to get more of them using the buttons, but not sure how to approach it." There we go. Yeah, the other 4 understand what I'm saying very well. Frequently, they respond faster than she does. I'd like to get more of them using the buttons too, but not sure how to approach it. They're quite a big herd.
That's a question for me. The number one piece of advice that I would give for this is one-on-one time. So you say they're a big herd. Put the herd away and do one animal at a time and just work at them. It really alleviates some of the pressure, and it also will alleviate some of that. If you have one learner that's kind of stepping in and saying, "Oh, I'm going to talk now," if you remove that learner and you're just focusing on the one that you're actually ready to work with right then and there, that'll help a lot. That's something that's been definitely a game changer in my household, is just the one-on-one time, and actually taking my primary learner and putting her away for a little bit so that she's not able to stomp all over the board and, express frustration that somebody else happens to be talking to me right then and there. Because she's a jealous type. So I would say, first and foremost, focus on one-on-one time. And the other big thing, and it's hard to do, is try not to compare. And it's so hard to do. It was hard for me. But, you might have one learner that is really excelling and another one that's really struggling. And that doesn't mean that your other learner that's struggling isn't as smart. It's just, they're just learning in a different way, and just try and be extra patient with them and prepare with, pay attention to their body language, especially. I know that when I first started out, I started with both of my dogs, and I really wanted Bear to do this as well. And his body language was such that he was really showing signs of stress from it. So I really had to approach him differently. So yeah, remove your strongest learner, or, all the other learners, if you've got a huge household like that, and work on them one-on-one, and try really hard not to compare. It's hard, I know. But then, focus on their body language and remember that it's supposed to be fun. I'll say it in every single comment. This is supposed to be fun. So if your learner is stressed out like my dog was, then it's time to take a step back and find that fun spot for them and for you. One of the things that I struggled with was because I was struggling with comparisons, I was frustrated with Bear because he wasn't doing as well as I thought that he could, or as well as I thought he should be doing. So take a step back and remind yourself that, this is to aid in communication between the two of you. And it's not the six of you. If you have a 5-learner household, it's not the six of you, it's the two of you. It's whoever you've got in front of you, in front of that board. So that's really, if you want to encourage others to participate, that's kind of the jumping off point. And then once they're talking to you one-on-one like that, then it can be challenging to incorporate them all into the same room. But first you've got to get them interacting one-on-one. Good luck.
I love that. That's a really good answer.
It was a really good answer.
All right. No, go ahead, Anna. Sorry.
Oh, I had a little piece to add. Don't assume that your learner, whoever's not your primary learner, that other animals in the house aren't paying attention, even if they don't act like they're paying attention. They probably are. And it always comes back to modeling, right? If you've ever had a college roommate, for instance, who never spoke to me, and so I never spoke to her, right? You don't talk to people who don't talk to you. So keep that in mind, right? When Janet was talking about, one-on-one time, like if you have a learner in your household who you have already written off and decided they're too stupid, which breaks my heart. And a lot of people do that. I see so many comments on the forum where they're like, oh, I have this learner who's going to be really good, and this learner who's too dumb to ever learn this. And it makes me so sad because I'm like, I don't want to say that anybody's dog isn't smart, but the dogs that are learning this are not that smart. They're average, right? And some of them are I'm sure more intelligent than others, but like they can't, not every learner who has an amazing button command is a genius. So don't write anybody off, and model, even if they're not paying attention, even if they act like they don't care, always model if it's relevant.
I just want to add really quickly that my one learner, Hero, didn't start pushing buttons until we were 4 months in. And I thought he had zero interest. And then all of a sudden he decided to start using them. So there's always a chance.
Yeah, fully agreed there. I had a very similar experience. All right, so and as Jenny put in the chat, we have a few questions still to get through, and we're getting close to 7.
Can I just really join in real fast? I still wanted to.
You're next up. No worries.
Yeah. Well, it was about the learners, the multiple households, and I agree with everything that Janet said. But I also wanted to mention that I am planning to get a new kitten, and I want to teach them the buttons as well. But I have a huge soundboard with like 40 buttons. It would be overwhelming for a new learner to be like, oh yeah, go teach them. So I thought that maybe I should do a separate soundboard and start like with 1-2 buttons and teach them like this. But then I started noticing with my second cat learner that she had her own separate soundboard, only 6 buttons. But when I showed her the other soundboard with 40 buttons that she doesn't know anything about, and she's asking for food right now. But I showed her the bigger soundboard, and I started teaching her only 1 button. Not for straks, Phoebe. Sorry. She's spamming. So I started just teaching her 1 button, which was outside, and I kept showing her this is the button that means outside. That was the only button I modeled to her. And eventually she did press it to go outside. So even though it was a big board with 40 buttons, as long as I only focused on 1 button, then I was able to actually still model the buttons, even though there's a lot. So yeah, even if you have an existing board with loads of buttons and you have a new learner coming in, it might seem overwhelming, but just take it slow, do the one-on-one time, and only go 1 button at a time on the soundboard. Don't go like 5-word phrases like, oh, do you want food? Do you want to go outside? No, just one at a time. And once they start pressing it, you can just move on to the next button so that you can explore the entire soundboard. And that's my opinion.
I totally agree with Celiana.
Nice. All right. Thank you. And yeah, for those who don't know, Celiana is also a guide, even though she's not a panelist today. So you can take her word to heart. Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, we have a few more questions that I'm going to try to get through, but we aren't accepting any new ones. And just to the panelists, yeah, trying to keep it shorter. But Jenny did send the link. We have a forum that you can ask questions on there, and that's really good. There's always a ton of answers there. We also have a Discord. I'm not sure if the link is in there. So you're also welcome to ask questions there, and there's always people there to help. For the rest of the questions, the next one I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I have 5 more to get to. So how much do you use treats to teach button pressing?
All right, I'm going to speak really quick. So as a dog trainer, I am used to using treats. And one of the things is you want to use treats with buttons for target training. So, but you want to be careful. We were talking about this in chat about the food related, because you don't want your learners to figure out that pressing this button equals food. And then they learn, oh, all buttons equal food. So you have to be careful. And I don't want to go into target training too much just because we don't have a lot of time. But I would say go look on the forum for target training tips and tricks. That's probably where we want to go. And probably we'll do another beginner series like focused on target training.
Nice. Okay. And I'm going to probably keep it to one answer for each of these questions, if that's all right with you guys. So next one is, my dog is a very skittish, shy dog, and she's somewhat afraid of the buttons and the fact that sound comes out of them. How do I overcome this hurdle?
I've got one. Target training. There's an FAQ on the forum that goes into this. With a dog that's afraid of the sound, start with a blank button. Do target training. Like I wouldn't start modeling if especially it depends on sort of the degree of fear. But if you have a dog who's especially afraid, who's like runs and hides in another room when they hear the noise, I wouldn't even bother setting up a soundboard yet, and just work on desensitizing them to the button, clicking don't even pull the little tab out of it. Like just start with a blank button and then you can work your way up. And there are, Jenny, I'm sure we'll put a link. We have a whole piece on the forum about how to do that.
Okay, awesome. And next one, my cat understands verbal prompts. Yes, no, all done. Only in the context of the kitchen. We're still in the button training nonsense word stage. Should I try to move some buttons to the kitchen to attach those words to a button for modeling? I think I saw Celiana spoke to this a bit as well already, and I can personally say that I do have buttons in the kitchen for that. I somewhat regret it because I can't get them out of the kitchen, but some other people that don't want to move them out of the kitchen have had no issues with that. So it's basically just where your end goal is there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's fine to move the buttons into the kitchen. It also, I would say, model those words that your cat knows in other rooms. Make a point to do that, and try and expand it beyond just that one room. And you can do both of those at the same time. You can have the buttons in the kitchen, and then you can be modeling those same words in other rooms. Like Jenny said, it kind of depends on where you want the buttons in your household to end up, and how much space you've got in the kitchen. But you can either put the buttons in that kitchen, or you can focus on verbally modeling in other rooms.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's one of those, maybe there's no wrong answer in that respect. Okay, and did we make it? Okay, I think we are at the last question. So is it okay to have This is very relevant. Is it okay to have separate buttons in specific rooms for certain actions or requests or things, or should they be all together? Just one of those really kind of base of everything questions that we come back to so often.
I want Celiana to answer this one because I know what her answer will be.
She might have left to go feed her cat.
Well, and she did answer in chat.
Okay.
I can answer again, yes, but this is definitely my personal experience. But when it comes to putting buttons in different places near different objects, it sounds easy, like, hey, if you want to go outside, you put down a button near the door, you press the button to go outside. Sounds easy, right? Well, in essence, you are teaching your learner that the buttons mean whatever they're closest to, and they just start ignoring the actual word on it. So that's how I ended up with a learner that, sorry, I'm a little out of breath. I just ran upstairs. So yeah, that's how we end up with a learner that starts associating buttons near what it's closest to. For example, behind me in my room, I have a bed for Zuko to lie down and nap on. And there are buttons right next to it for my cat Phoebe, mostly food-related buttons. And Zuko casually presses treat. And I look at him, and he looks at me, and he goes and lies down on his bed, because treat is the closest button to his bed. And he does that for everything. He will press the closest button to the room that he's going into, because that's what he did whenever I said, let's go outside. And yeah, I would press the button, open the door, and that's what he did. So in essence, it was not a great way to start. I definitely regret doing that, because he didn't notice or paid attention to what the word was saying at all. Verbally, he does respond, and if I press the buttons myself, he will respond like that. But when he uses them himself, he just means whatever the button is closest to. And it's been 2 years. I still haven't unlearned it, even though I've been modeling a lot, even though he's got another cat in the same household who he sees using the buttons correctly, but he still uses them the way that he wants to. So in my opinion, I just don't recommend putting buttons near objects in case you have a learner like mine, and then you find out after you've taught them, and it's so hard to just unteach them. So it's better to just, play it safe and keep them all in the central location, so that they have to pay attention to what the button is saying and not to where the button is located or where it's near to and whatnot. Because we haven't seen any learners have any sort of difficulty learning the buttons if you start out with a central soundboard. So I don't see any downsides for that.
I'll just chime in really. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add on to that. I do think it's fine to have like maybe multiple soundboards, to have like a if you've got like a smaller soundboard in your office because you don't have room for a duplicate soundboard, or like, for instance, Birdie has an entire tile of food words. He's got food, rice, veggies, treats, and chew. And if you had something like that, and all of those things are in the kitchen, and you wanted to keep that in the kitchen because you're always making that decision in the kitchen, like, I think that's fine. I agree with Celiana. The advice to put buttons next to the thing early on is pretty outdated, and I don't think anybody on the forum recommends that anymore for that reason. But it is fine to have buttons in more than one place in your house if that works for you in your household. Like, so I just wanted to clarify in that way.
Yeah, and think of it.
Also agreed.
It's really easy to start out with the buttons in one central location. And if that doesn't work for your learner, it's easy to break them up and put them in a different location or separate them out. But and Celiana, I'm so sorry to put you on the spot like that. I just knew you'd have an amazing answer, and it was good. But yeah, like she mentioned, it can be hard to consolidate the buttons into a central location, but it's not hard to do the opposite. So start with them consolidated in one central location that's convenient for you, where you spend a lot of your time. And then if that's not working for you or for your learner, then you can change things up however you need to.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say fairly similar. I mean, I started with Parker with buttons all in one central location and with 6 at the same time. And I think for her, it helped her distinguish that all of these things mean something different and that this is the place that I come to communicate. And so I think that it drives like the bigger picture of what they're for more to them. I know people who will have, say, like a smaller secondary board, you know, if they have like a back house or something like that, but even something with like, you know, particular food related things. I mean, most of the time Parker and I are in the living room, which is where her soundboard is. So even if she's asking for something that's going to take place in a different room, she still needs to kind of be there, you know, to ask me. And that's where I am most of the time. Not that she won't try and bug me about something if I'm in the other room, which she will. But yeah, so I mean, also thinking about, you know, where, regardless of what these things are about, where are the conversations most likely to take place?
And also, I know we're trying to wrap up, but when all the words are on a central location, that also allows for different usage that you might not anticipate, different combinations. One that Birdie did that was like a strange one that took us a second to figure out was like puzzle poop, when he had a puzzle that he couldn't get the last too big treat out of the puzzle, and so he was like, the puzzle needs to poop. And if we had poop by the back door away from the board where puzzle was, he would never have been able to express that, and that was amazing. That was a highlight of our button journey. So you also, when the buttons are too scattered, like, you also lose out on easy ways to combine them that you as a human might not think that they're going to, you might not think they're capable of it, or it's just like not a usage you would consider. But when they're all together, they can experiment and do crazy stuff.
Yeah, going even further on that, like, Abe literally has a button that means he's had a situation where he has a button in the kitchen that's like called up, and it's to get his toys on top of the fridge. And it's a terrible button that I regret doing because it's too specific. But he has literally meant that exact thing of like, can I get a toy that's on top of the fridge? But he'll press a related button on his main soundboard instead, because the other button's in the kitchen and it's just not his main way of talking about stuff. So if he's trying to talk to me, he won't go out his way to go all the way over there to use that button. So we've missed out on stuff there too. So it does have some pretty far-reaching implications there. Okay. On that, we're going to wrap up. Only 13 minutes over. That's pretty good compared to some of our test pilot calls and whatnot. We're not at the half-hour mark yet, so great. Okay. So thank you so much to everyone who joined, both people who asked questions and the guides and test pilots that showed up, and especially to our panelists, because that was an amazing discussion and I got a lot out of it. So I'm sure the beginners here did as well. Jenny has put some links in the chat we have our forum there, our Discord is there, and also the Twitch channel that this is being streamed on is there. And if you go into the video section of that Twitch channel after this is done recording, you can see the recording of this video. We're also going to have the YouTube up. I'll have the link in that updated in the original posts for this event. Once that's up, that may be a few days. Yeah, awesome. On that note, thank you everyone and have a great night.